Luma and the Train of Soft Rain. Luma reached the old station at a quiet hour when the lamps along the platform glowed the color of tea and the puddles held a little sky of their own. The station was not crowded. A few travelers waited with bags that looked more like companions than burdens, and the ticket clerk hummed a melody that fit the rain so well the rain seemed to have learned it from the clerk. Luma stepped onto the platform and the boards beneath her paws answered with a soft memory of footsteps. She read a sign with neat letters that promised a night train whose route would draw a calm circle through fields and villages and return before morning. The train would travel slowly and would stop wherever the rain asked it to stop. This felt like the kind of journey her body and thoughts could accept easily. So she followed the painted line toward a car that had a lamp in every window and curtains the color of gentle twilight. At the door a conductor with kind eyes lifted a hand and said that the night would do the guiding and that all she needed to carry was a readiness to rest. Luma nodded and entered the car. The interior carried the hush of a library that has decided to become a moving room. Seats were arranged in pairs facing one another, and between them small tables stood like patient listeners. A kettle sat on a low shelf near the end of the car, and it gave off a warm breath that smelled of barley and cinnamon. Above the seats a row of hooks held umbrellas that did not drip because they had been comforted by the presence of the train. Luma chose a window seat. The glass was cool and clean and the rain made dotted lines that drifted into clarity before becoming new dotted lines again. A book rested on the table. It did not have a title on the cover. When she opened it, the pages were blank, yet they felt complete, as if the words were standing invisibly in the spaces between fibers waiting for the right eyes to rest upon them. She closed the book and let her paws rest on it as one might rest hands on the lap of a friend. The train sighed and began to move. It left the station with the politeness of a guest leaving a quiet house. The wheels found their rhythm easily and the rain tuned itself to that rhythm. The city folded itself behind them and lanterns along the tracks bowed twice and went to sleep. Luma watched the first field appear as a dark quilt stitched with faint reflections. Farmhouses sat patiently with a room or two lit like thoughts that had decided to remain awake to keep company with the night. A dog looked up from a porch and then decided that the train was not a problem and set its head back onto its paws. Wind moved across the grass and the grass accepted the visit with a hint of pleasure. The wheels sang a line that repeated and improved itself in small ways until it felt like the only song that should be sung right now. The conductor visited with a tray of cups. Luma accepted a cup that steamed softly and tasted like roasted barley clouds. She held it and felt the warmth spread through her chest. The conductor said that every car on this train keeps a small promise to make the night a kinder place. One car keeps the promise of warm tea, one car keeps the promise of clean blankets, one car keeps the promise of stories that speak below a whisper, and one car keeps the promise of a window that shows the moon even when the clouds pretend to hide it. Tonight, the conductor added, the rain car will teach everyone how to listen so well that listening becomes rest. Luma thanked the conductor and the conductor thanked the rain for choosing a steady pace. The first village appeared. Lights gathered around a square where a tree held its leaves like a choir holding a long note. The train paused. No one boarded and no one stepped down. The pause existed to let the rain do a small performance on the station roof. Each drop landed and became a tiny bright circle that expanded and faded, and the circles overlapped like lace made by patient water. After a minute the train moved on and carried the sound with it the way a sleeve carries a bit of fragrance after leaving a garden. Luma placed her cup on the table and pressed her forehead to the cool glass and let the rhythm settle the last bits of the day that had not yet learned how to lie down. In the next stretch there were orchards. Trees stood in rows that curved gently with the land, and under each tree lay a collection of small puddles that caught and kept particular stars. Between the rows walked a person with a lantern shaped like a pear, and the light made a path that looked like a necklace on the earth. The train slowed as if not to disturb the pattern of this walk. Luma felt the car almost purr, and she smiled at the idea that a train could purr when it is pleased with the night. A cat in the opposite seat opened one eye in agreement and then closed it again, possibly having been made of the same soft weather as the upholstery. The conductor returned and asked whether Luma would like a small blanket. It was woven in a simple pattern of quiet waves and felt like a story of low tides. She drew it over herself and the blanket decided to learn her shape. With the cup on the table and the book under her paws and the blanket whispering a slow song of its own, she began to feel that this entire car had been built to hold sleep without pressing. The train passed a bridge and beneath it a river widened to make room for rain, which is a courteous thing for a river to do. On the far bank a fox family trotted across a pale road and vanished into reeds. Luma felt a cousinly pride and wished them a good night, keeping the wish small so as not to wake the cat. The night gave the train a small hill. As the cars climbed the grade the wheels spoke a deeper syllable and the rain changed key. On the crest of the hill a signal lamp blinked and the blink felt like a slow heartbeat. From the top, Luma saw a field of rice shimmering under a veil of water. The field was so regular and yet so alive that it appeared to breathe. She let her own breath meet that pace. She exhaled and the field inhaled. She inhaled and the field exhaled. Something in her shoulders loosened and something behind her eyes grew warm. The train continued and the hill let it go with the confidence of a teacher who knows the student has learned what was needed. At a small station with a wooden sign the train paused again. This time the pause invited a memory. On the platform stood a few chairs facing a vending machine that had once sold citrus sodas to giggling students who waited for the late train of summer. Tonight the chairs faced the rain. The vending machine showed the reflection of the car, and in that reflection Luma looked like a dream, which is a kind way to look on a rainy night. A clock on the wall did not hurry to decide the minute. It waited to see how the rain would vote, and the rain voted for patience. The minute chose patience, and the train agreed and then rolled forward with a nod to the clock. After this station, the conductor whispered that the story car would open. Luma followed down the corridor. The story car was dim, lit by lamps that looked like pears and leaves and small moons. People sat in a circle on soft benches. No one spoke loudly. In the center stood a small box with a slot, and each passenger placed a folded word into the slot. The conductor shook the box gently and pulled a word. Rain, the conductor read. Another word was drawn. Window. Another. Nest. Luma listened as the conductor wove the 3 words into a paragraph about a window that had hosted a nest and the way rain taught the nest to be strong by showing that strength and be soft. Another passenger drew 3 words. Lantern. Bread. Memory. They created a paragraph about a traveler who always buys a loaf when arriving in a new town so that the memory of that town will always smell warm when remembered. Luma drew 3 words. Pillow. Field. Lullaby. Her paragraph described a field that turned itself into a pillow for a fox and how the night brought a lullaby by asking the rain to pat the grass with gentle fingers. The circle hummed with approval and the car seemed to become even softer, as if the benches had heard a compliment. When the story car closed its eyes, the tea car opened its smile. The conductor poured hot water over herbs and placed tiny cups before all who visited. Steam rose in spirals like languages that needed no translation. Luma sipped, and the cup informed her that the blend had been designed by a gardener who speaks kindly to leaves. She believed this and drank more slowly. The windows fogged a little and passengers drew pictures with fingers that did not want to hurry. The pictures were mainly circles and boats and cats and umbrellas because such shapes behave well on fogged glass. The cat from the earlier seat visited and inspected each drawing with professional gravity, then approved them all by sitting in the middle of the longest bench and closing both eyes at once. The train entered a district of slow factories. The buildings held themselves like tired dancers who never lost grace. Lights burnished the wet pavement until it looked like polished wood. A guard stood at a gate and greeted the train with a nod, for even a guard appreciates a companionable machine that passes with a friendly heart. The factories did not clang at this hour. They breathed. Somewhere a crane moved a single crate as if holding a sleeping child. In the distance a whistle sounded not as warning, but as a way of saying I am here and I am careful. Rain softened every sound and the train accepted the softness and reduced its voice to the volume of a bedside story. In the library car a gentle librarian waited among shelves that seemed improbable for a moving vehicle. The shelves were fixed and yet they swayed like a dream of forests. The librarian invited each visitor to choose a book by touch only. No titles were allowed until after choice. Luma ran a paw along spines and one grew warm under her touch. She drew it out and opened to a page that showed drawings of blankets folded in different languages. Each fold carried a meaning such as welcome or you may rest or I will keep watch. She turned the page and found lines about trains that travel in circles, so the end of the line arrives in time to greet the beginning. It felt very familiar in a way that made her sleepy and attentive at the same time. Midnight arrived with the least drama possible. The conductor adjusted a knob that tuned the roof to accept rain a little more slowly so that drops landed like single notes on a music sheet instead of a crowd gathering at once. Passengers settled lower in their seats or stretched out on benches or found corners that acted like nests. Luma pulled the blanket up to her chin and let the window be her gentle stage. The glass showed up a parade of reflections. Occasionally her own face passed like a kind stranger. Sometimes the lamp passed and added a bright comma. Sometimes another car slid by with a glimpse of passengers who were also traveling but not in the same story, and she wished them good sleep without needing to learn their names. The conductor offered a small box of snacks. In it lay salted rice crackers, dried slices of pear, and a single square of chocolate wrapped in simple paper. Luma tasted a cracker and it made a sound like a leaf saying yes. She saved the chocolate for the moment when the train would pass under a long bridge because chocolate likes bridges. The conductor smiled at that knowledge and went on to offer the box to the cat, who declined with dignity and accepted a tiny saucer of milk instead. The milk drew one elegant circle in the saucer and then became still in a way that made everyone more restful just by looking at it. She closed her eyes without closing her ears. The train whispered about distances in a way that made them seem short. The rain wrote upon the roof and the writing said be like water but also remember you are fur and breath and heart. She dreamed briefly of a corridor made of curtains where each curtain was a different shade of blue and behind each curtain a different gentle instrument played. A cello drew a line as steady as the rails. A flute rose when the train crossed a river. A drum with a soft hand sounded when the wheels corrected themselves after a curve. She walked through the corridor and thanked each instrument, and each instrument bowed. When she returned to waking, there was a village outside holding a festival of quiet lamps. The lamps were not bright. They were exactly enough. They mirrored themselves on wet pavement and made pathways for dreams to wander home. Morning began to build itself far away beyond hills that had not yet decided which color they would wear. The train took its time to notice. Luma watched as the rain thinned into a mist that behaved like kindness painted on the air. Birds tried their first questions of the day. A farmer checked the sky and decided to let the field think for itself an hour longer. The conductor came by with a soft cloth and polished the window in a way that made the view feel freshly washed. "Thank you," the window seemed to say, and the conductor nodded as if the glass had a perfectly sensible point. The route had turned in a circle during the night, and now the station of origin waited ahead like an old friend holding two warm cups. Before arrival, the conductor invited the passengers to write a sentence on a small card that would be left in a wooden box near the door. These sentences would season the air for travelers still to come. Luma wrote this: "Let the rain decide the pace and let your breath agree, then watch how easily the day remembers how to be gentle." She placed the card in the box and imagined it as a little lantern that would light for someone hours from now and make them smile without knowing why. She rang the bell in her mind and heard it clearly, and so did the cat, who opened one eye as if to acknowledge the good sound. The train entered the station with a sigh of honest wood and clean steel. The rain had become a drizzle that children love. People stepped down and lifted collars and adjusted hats and held their bags with the care one gives to sleeping birds. The conductor stood at the door and thanked each passenger in a tone that felt like placing a blanket on their shoulders one more time. Luma paused and looked back along the length of the car. The lamps watched her with satisfaction because they had done their work. The book still lay on the table, and she opened it to page 1 to see whether the words had appeared now that the journey was complete. They had. They read, "You have already read me by riding and by resting and by listening." She closed the book and left it for the next traveler. Outside the station, a small bakery offered steam and sugar to anyone who asked nicely. Luma asked nicely. The baker placed a roll in a paper sleeve and said that the oven was happy today. Luma believed it and tasted the truth of the statement while walking back toward the platform to watch the train prepare for its next journey. The roof dripped steadily but not sadly. The puddles reflected a clean sky that was forming itself behind the grey. A sparrow landed near her and tried to look serious but failed and hopped away with a crumb that she did not mind losing. She finished the roll and cleaned her whiskers and decided to walk to the river while the drizzle still sang softly. The river path began where the station fences ended. The water was brown in the friendly way of rivers that carry good stories in their current. Barges moved like thoughtful elephants. Willow branches combed the air and found it tidy. Old bricks in the embankment showed the history of rains. Luma followed the path until it found a small park with a round gazebo. On its roof the rain made its own round applause, which was not loud, just steady and approving. Benches waited without impatience. A gardener swept puddles toward drains with a broom that looked older than the gazebo, and every stroke made the path more confident. A child arrived with a bright umbrella and taught the puddles how to accept a splash without losing their balance. A grandparent followed and made a small sound of contentment noted by the pigeons, who prefer contentment to every other human sound. Luma sat on the edge of the gazebo and felt the wood tell her a short story about picnics, summer concerts, and winter snow that wore hats made of sunshine. She thanked the wood, and the wood became a little warmer, which was very pleasant for her paws. The mist thinned into a memory, and sunlight practiced several shades before choosing the one that made the river look like a long polished table for a family of boats. She walked back to the station and stood at the far end where the tracks curve away toward their next quiet. The night train had taken its rest, and now a day train ticked kindly to itself. Luma knew that some journeys are made of distance and some are made of slowness. This one had been made of slowness in a way that brought everything closer. She remembered the circle of words in the story car, the blank book that became full, the tea that tasted like roasted clouds, and the cat who approved of every drawing. She placed a paw on the metal of the rail and it hummed a little, promising to treat the next group of travelers with the same steady patience. She nodded to the rail as if it were a friend she would see again soon. She left the station by the long steps that lead to a wide street lined with trees. Cars passed with the gentlest voice a city can manage. Shops opened their awnings like umbrellas learning a new dance. The rain gave the day back to the people, and the people promised to use it kindly. Luma carried the weightless blanket and the memory of the cup and the bell she had rung in her mind, and felt that the day could not possibly ask more of her than she was ready to give. She chose a direction at random and set out with a pace borrowed from last night's rails. She imagined future travelers placing their sentences into the wooden box, and she read those sentences in advance, and every one of them said, "You can rest here." She listened for the far thread of a whistle, and when she heard it, her muscles unfurled like ribbons placed in warm water.